The frontier settlement of Red Creek sat between endless golden plains and a line of dark, distant mountains. It was a rough place where people came and went with the seasons, chasing gold, cattle, or simply a chance at a better life. Humans lived alongside orcs, traders, hunters, and wandering warriors, but despite the mixture of people, there were still those who never quite belonged. Braca was one of them. At 28, she had already earned a cruel reputation among the townspeople. They called her the bold maid behind her back, laughing whenever another wedding was announced and her name was nowhere among the brides. Braca was an orc woman, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark green skin, strong arms, and small tusks that showed whenever she smiled. Her appearance frightened some men, while others simply considered her too unusual to marry. Braca pretended not to care. Every morning, she worked at Miller's trading post, lifting heavy crates, carrying sacks of grain, and repairing broken fences. She was stronger than most of the men in town, but nobody praised her for it. To the townspeople, her strength was simply another reason she wasn't considered proper marriage material. Whenever women gathered outside the church, Braca could hear their whispers. "Poor thing. She'll probably never find a husband. She should have married years ago. Perhaps no man wants an orc wife." Braca always kept her eyes lowered and continued working. But deep inside, their words hurt. She didn't dream of a grand wedding or a wealthy husband. She only wanted someone who would look at her without seeing a monster or a servant. She wanted a home where she wouldn't have to wonder whether she belonged. Then, one dusty afternoon, a stranger rode into Red Creek. His name was Tomas, an Apache warrior known among the nearby settlements for his skill with horses and his quiet nature. He wore a weathered leather vest, carried a rifle across his back, and rode with the confidence of someone who knew the wilderness better than any town. But it wasn't Tomas who caught everyone's attention. It was the horse behind him. The stallion was enormous, black as midnight, with a white mark running down the center of his forehead. His muscles shifted beneath his coat as he moved, and his eyes constantly watched the people around him. Someone whispered that the horse had been captured in the mountains. Another claimed it had thrown 3 riders. Tomas led the stallion toward the stable, but suddenly the animal reared violently. Its hooves struck the air as Tomas struggled to hold the reins. People screamed and scattered. Braca watched silently from the trading post. She noticed something others didn't. The stallion wasn't angry. He was terrified. As Tomas tried to calm the animal, Braca slowly stepped away from the crowd. She didn't know why she moved toward the dangerous horse. Perhaps it was because she understood what it meant to be feared simply for being different. The stallion noticed her. For one strange moment, everything became quiet. Braca stopped several feet away. She didn't reach for the reins. She didn't speak loudly. She simply stood there. The wild stallion lowered his head. Tomas stared at the impossible sight. And for the first time, the people of Red Creek stopped looking at Braca as the unwanted old maid. They began wondering who she truly was, writing, variant equals, document, ID equals, 74126, #### part 2, the Apache and his untamable stallion. The following morning, Red Creek was still talking about what had happened outside Miller's trading post. Everyone had seen it. Tomas's wild black stallion, the horse that had thrown 3 men and nearly dragged an experienced rider into the dirt, had gone completely still when Braca approached him. Of course, the townspeople had their own explanations. She must have some kind of orc magic, one man claimed. Or maybe the horse was simply tired, another argued. Braca heard the whispers but ignored them. She had no interest in becoming the center of attention. She returned to her work as usual, carrying sacks of flour into the trading post while the rest of the town watched her from a safe distance. But Tomas couldn't forget what he had witnessed. The stallion was named Shadow. Tomas had found him several months earlier in the mountains after discovering the horse trapped in a narrow canyon. The animal had been half-starved, covered in wounds, and surrounded by broken branches where it had desperately fought to escape. Tomas had freed him. Since then, he had tried everything to earn the horse's trust. Nothing worked. Shadow allowed Tomas to feed him, but the moment a saddle appeared, the stallion became dangerous. He kicked, reared, and bit at anyone who came too close. Tomas had never been defeated by a horse before. Until Shadow. That morning, Tomas led the stallion behind the stable and began preparing him for another attempt. Braca watched from across the yard. "Don't," Tomas suddenly said. She looked at him. "Don't what?" "Come closer." Braca glanced at Shadow. The stallion was already pulling against the reins. "He's afraid," she said. Tomas frowned. "He's dangerous." Both can be true. Tomas studied her carefully. Most people saw only the horse's size and strength. Braca seemed to see something else. "What makes you think he's afraid?" Braca pointed toward the animal's ears. "Look at them." Tomas watched. Shadow's ears were pressed backward. "Whenever someone raises their hand, he flinches," Braca continued. "And when you pull the reins, he fights harder. You're trying to control him before he trusts you." Tomas looked at his horse. For the first time, he wondered if she was right. Braca slowly walked toward Shadow. Tomas immediately reached for his rifle. "Braca." She stopped. "I won't touch him." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" Tomas's eyes narrowed. "The point is that if he attacks you, I may not be fast enough." Braca smiled faintly. "You don't have to save me from everything." The word surprised him. Braca continued forward. Shadow stiffened. The horse lifted his head, watching her carefully. Braca stopped several feet away. Then she turned sideways. She didn't stare into his eyes. She didn't reach for him. She simply stood there. Minutes passed. The townspeople gathered at a distance, expecting disaster. But nothing happened. Slowly, Shadow lowered his head. Braca took one small step forward. The horse didn't move. Another step. Still nothing. Tomas stared in disbelief. Braca finally extended one hand. Shadow sniffed the air. Then, almost impossibly, he stepped toward her. A murmur spread through the crowd. Braca gently placed her palm against the stallion's muzzle. Shadow closed his eyes. Tomas felt something strange tighten in his chest. He had spent months trying to tame that horse with patience, discipline, and determination. Braca had done it in minutes. But she hadn't conquered Shadow. She had understood him. Tomas looked at the woman the town had mocked for years. Suddenly, he wondered what else everyone had failed to see about her. Braca withdrew her hand. "He's not wild," she whispered. Tomas stepped closer. "What is he, then?" Braca looked at Shadow. "Lonely." Tomas fell silent. For the first time in many years, he recognized something familiar in another person's eyes. Braca wasn't the only one who understood loneliness. And perhaps that was why his untamable stallion had chosen her. Writing, variant equals, document, ID equals, 31647, ####, part 3, the woman behind the strength. After that morning, something changed in Red Creek. The people still whispered about Braca, but their whispers were different now. Before, they had spoken about her as though she were invisible. The strong orc woman who carried heavy boxes, repaired fences, and worked longer hours than anyone else had rarely been considered worth noticing. Now, everyone wanted to know her secret. How had she calmed Tomas's wild stallion? Some believed she had used magic. Others claimed that orcs possessed strange abilities when dealing with animals. A few men simply laughed and insisted the horse would eventually turn against her. Braca ignored them all. Every afternoon, she visited Shadow. She never tried to ride him. She never put a saddle on his back. Instead, she brought him apples and spoke to him in a quiet voice. Sometimes she sat near the stable for hours without touching him at all. Tomas began watching from a distance. At first, he told himself he was only concerned about his horse. But after several days, he realized he was coming to the stable even when Shadow didn't need him. He wanted to see Braca. One evening, Tomas found her sitting beside the fence while Shadow grazed nearby. "You're wasting your time," he said. Braca glanced at him. "Doing what?" "Talking to a horse. He listens better than most people." Tomas almost smiled. "That's true." Braca looked surprised. It was the first time she had seen humor in his expression. Tomas sat beside the fence. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. Finally, Tomas asked, "Why do you do it?" "Do what?" "Understand him." Braca looked toward Shadow. "Because I know what it feels like to be judged before someone knows you." Tomas turned toward her. Braca continued. "People see my size. My skin. My tusks. They decide what I am before I speak." Her voice remained calm, but Tomas heard the sadness beneath it. "They think I'm strong, so they assume I don't get hurt." Tomas lowered his eyes. He understood that feeling. Among his people, strength was respected, but it could also become a burden. People expected him to be fearless because he was a warrior. Few ever asked what fear felt like to him. "What about the marriage talk?" Tomas asked. Braca stiffened. Tomas immediately regretted the question. But Braca sighed. "Everyone thinks I'm too old." "You're 28. To them, that's old. That's foolish." Braca laughed softly. The sound caught Tomas by surprise. "Perhaps," she said. "But it doesn't stop the words from hurting." Tomas studied her face. For the first time, he noticed details he had never seen before. The tiny scar above her eyebrow. The warmth in her dark eyes. The way she smiled whenever Shadow came closer. She wasn't the lonely, unwanted woman the town described. She was someone who had survived years of rejection without allowing bitterness to destroy her kindness. Over the following weeks, Tomas and Braca grew closer. Together, they worked with Shadow. Tomas taught Braca how to place a saddle gently across the stallion's back. Braca taught Tomas to recognize the signs that Shadow was becoming frightened. Their methods were different, but somehow they worked. One afternoon, Tomas handed Braca the reins. "Try." Braca looked uncertain. "Are you sure?" Tomas nodded. She climbed onto Shadow's back. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. The horse stood perfectly still. Braca looked down at Tomas. A small smile appeared on her face. Tomas felt his heart beat faster. Then someone shouted from the road. "Look at that." The old maid finally found herself a husband. Laughter erupted. Braca's smile disappeared. She climbed down immediately. Tomas turned sharply toward the crowd. His expression became cold. "Say it again." The laughter stopped. The man who had spoken suddenly looked nervous. Tomas stepped forward. "She has more courage than every coward hiding behind your laughter." Braca stared at him. Nobody had ever defended her like that. Tomas returned to her side. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Something had changed between them. For the first time, Braca wondered if someone might actually see her, not as an orc, not as an old maid, but simply as Braca. And for the first time, Tomas realized he was no longer merely watching her tame his horse. She was slowly taming something far more dangerous. His lonely heart. Writing, variant equals, document, ID equals, 85214, hashtag part 4, the test of the wild horse. The summer heat had settled over Red Creek when the trouble began. For several weeks, Shadow had continued to change. The once untamable Stallion now allowed Braca to saddle him without protest. He followed her around the stable like a loyal dog and even permitted Tomas to ride him for short distances. But Shadow still had one weakness. Thunder. Whenever storms rolled across the plains, the Stallion became terrified. Tomas knew this, but he had never expected a storm to arrive so suddenly. One evening, dark clouds gathered over the mountains. The wind rose. Then came the thunder. Shadow panicked. The stable door burst open, and the black Stallion charged into the night. Shadow. Tomas ran after him. Braca followed. Rain began pouring from the sky. Stay here. Tomas shouted. Braca ignored him. He'll run toward the mountains. Tomas looked at her. How do you know? Because that's where he came from. Together, they followed the horse's tracks into the darkness. The storm grew worse. Lightning flashed across the sky. They eventually reached a narrow mountain trail. Then they heard it. A desperate cry. Braca ran forward. Shadow was trapped near the edge of a cliff. One of his front legs had fallen between two rocks. The terrified animal was pulling violently, making the situation worse. Tomas reached for his rope. I'll get him out. No, Tomas stared at Braca. Braca, move. He'll fight you. He's injured. And frightened. Another flash of lightning illuminated the cliff. Shadow screamed. Braca slowly approached. Tomas grabbed her arm. Don't. She looked at him. He'll kill you. Braca gently removed his hand. He won't. Braca, she walked forward. The rain soaked her clothes. The wind whipped her hair across her face. Shadow struggled harder. Braca stopped. Then she began speaking. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just quietly. It's all right, Shadow. The horse froze. Braca took another step. You're not alone. Shadow's breathing slowed. Tomas watched in disbelief. Braca moved closer. Look at me. The Stallion lifted his head. Braca reached out. Shadow's muzzle touched her palm. She whispered to him until the animal stopped trembling. Then she turned toward Tomas. Now. Tomas understood. Working together, they carefully removed the stones trapping Shadow's leg. The horse stumbled free. But the ground beneath Braca suddenly collapsed. She fell. Tomas lunged forward. His hand caught her wrist. For one terrifying moment, Braca dangled over the cliff. Tomas. Hold on. He pulled with all his strength. Braca grabbed the edge. Tomas dragged her back onto solid ground. They lay there in the mud, breathing heavily. Then Braca began laughing. Tomas stared at her. What's funny? We saved him. Tomas looked toward Shadow. The Stallion stood nearby. Then he looked back at Braca. You almost died. So did you. That isn't funny. Braca's smile faded. Tomas's face was inches from hers. Rain ran down his cheeks. His eyes were filled with something she had never seen before. Fear. Not fear for himself. Fear of losing her. You shouldn't have followed me, he whispered. Braca looked at him. You wouldn't have found him alone. I would have tried. That isn't the same thing. Tomas fell silent. Braca realized how tightly he was still holding her hand. Neither of them moved. For a moment, the storm seemed to disappear. Then Shadow approached. The stallion lowered his head between them. Braca laughed again. Tomas finally smiled. Even he thinks we're foolish. Perhaps he does. They returned to Red Creek at dawn. The townspeople had been waiting. When they saw Braca riding beside Tomas on Shadow, everyone fell silent. The woman they had called unwanted had saved the horse no one else could tame. And the Apache warrior who had once trusted no one now rode beside her. But not everyone was pleased. Among the crowd stood a wealthy rancher named Caleb Mercer. He had watched everything from a distance. His eyes were fixed on Shadow. The stallion was worth a fortune. And now Caleb had realized something else. The woman everyone had ignored was the only person who could control him. A dangerous smile appeared on his face. He had just decided that he wanted both. Writing, variant equals, document, ID equals, 42719, hashtag part 5, when the town turned against them the storm had passed, but the trouble it left behind was only beginning. For several days, Red Creek could talk about nothing except Braca and Shadow. The story spread from one end of town to the other. Some said Braca had risked her life to save Tomas's horse. Others claimed she had saved Tomas himself. Every version of the story grew more dramatic with each telling. But one man wasn't interested in the romance of the tale. Caleb Mercer was interested in money. Caleb owned the largest ranch in the territory, and everyone knew he had an eye for valuable horses. He had watched Shadow from the moment Tomas arrived in town and immediately understood the stallion's worth. Now he knew that Braca could control him. That made her valuable too. One afternoon, Caleb approached Braca outside the trading post. "You've become quite famous," he said. Braca continued sorting a stack of supplies. "I'd rather not be." Caleb smiled. "I have a proposition." Braca finally looked at him. "What kind?" "I need someone who understands horses. Someone strong. Someone who isn't afraid of difficult animals." Braca immediately knew where this was going. "You want me to work at your ranch?" "I want more than that." His smile changed. "I want you to become my wife." Braca stared at him. For years, she had dreamed of someone asking her to marry them. But now that the words had finally come, she felt nothing. Caleb stepped closer. "You're nearly 30, Braca. You know how difficult it will be to find another opportunity like this." Braca's expression hardened. "An opportunity? To have a respectable home. A wealthy husband. A comfortable life." Braca shook her head. "You don't want me." Caleb frowned. "Excuse me? You want Shadow?" His expression darkened. "You're mistaken." "No," Braca turned away. "You saw me with the horse. That's when you decided I was worth marrying." Caleb's pride was wounded. "You should be grateful I'm offering you a future." Braca looked him directly in the eyes. "I already have a future." Then she walked away. Caleb watched her leave. For the first time in his life, a woman had rejected him without hesitation. He wasn't going to forget it. That night, Tomas found Braca sitting beside Shadow. "You look troubled." Caleb proposed. Tomas stopped. "He what?" Braca laughed bitterly. "Apparently, I'm suddenly desirable." Tomas's jaw tightened. "Did you accept?" Braca stared at him. No, relief flashed across Tomas's face before he could hide it. Braca noticed. Neither spoke. Then Tomas asked quietly, "Why not?" "Because he doesn't love me." Tomas looked away. "And what does love look like?" Braca studied him. "I don't know." Tomas turned toward her. "Neither do I." The words hung between them. Then Tomas reached for her hand. "I only know that when you disappeared into that storm, I thought I had lost something I couldn't replace." Braca's breath caught. Before she could answer, a loud crash came from the stable. Shadow screamed. They rushed inside. The stallion was gone. The door had been broken open. Tomas immediately saw the tracks. Someone took him. Bracca's face went pale. They followed the tracks to Caleb Mercer's ranch. There, they found Shadow locked inside a large enclosure. Caleb stood nearby. "You have no right to take my horse," Tomas said. Caleb smiled. "I purchased him." "From whom?" Caleb pointed toward a nervous stable hand. The man held a piece of paper. "Your signature," Caleb said. Tomas snatched the paper. It was a forgery. "You're a thief." Caleb's men surrounded them. "Leave the horse," Caleb warned. "And perhaps I'll forget this happened." Bracca stepped forward. "No," Caleb laughed. "You still don't understand. You're nothing without that horse." Bracca looked at Shadow. Then she looked back at Caleb. "No," her voice was calm. "Shadow is nothing without freedom." She turned to Tomas. "Get ready." Tomas understood. Bracca walked toward the enclosure. Caleb's men laughed. But when Shadow saw her, he immediately stopped fighting. Bracca climbed over the fence. She stood beside him. "Easy." Shadow lowered his head. Caleb's smile disappeared. Bracca removed the rope from the stallion's neck. Then she turned to the rancher's men. "Who wants to stop me?" Nobody moved. Tomas stepped beside her. Together, they walked Shadow out. Caleb could only watch. The entire town had gathered at the gate. And for the first time, they saw the truth. Bracca wasn't an unwanted woman waiting for someone to rescue her. She was strong enough to choose her own path. And Tomas wasn't standing beside her because she needed protection. He was standing beside her because he respected her. As they rode away, Bracca looked back at the town. The place that had once made her feel unwanted no longer mattered. Because she had finally found something better. She had found someone who saw her. But neither she nor Tomas knew that Caleb Mercer wasn't finished. He had lost the horse. He had lost his pride. And now he wanted revenge, writing, variant equals, document, ID equals, 61947, #### part 6, the woman who was finally chosen the following weeks brought a piece to Red Creek that Bracca had never known before. Caleb Mercer had lost his influence after Tomas exposed the forged papers he had used to claim Shadow. The town sheriff forced him to return the stolen horse, and several of Caleb's own workers finally spoke against him. His reputation was ruined, and his once powerful ranch began losing customers. But Bracca no longer cared about Caleb. She had learned something far more important. People would always talk. The same people who had called her an old maid now greeted her with smiles. The same women who had once whispered that no man would ever want her suddenly invited her to their homes. Bracca was polite. But she never forgot. She knew that many of them hadn't changed because they understood her. They had changed because they had finally seen her value. Tomas was different. He had seen her before anyone else did. One cool morning, Bracca stood beside Shadow in the stable. The great black stallion was no longer wild. He still had fire in his eyes, but it was no longer fear. He trusted her. Tomas entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're going to spoil him," he said. Bracca smiled. "He deserves it." Tomas handed her a cup. "Do you remember the first day I met you?" Bracca laughed. "You mean the day your horse nearly killed half the town?" "He didn't nearly kill anyone. He chased 3 men into a water trough." Tomas smiled. "They deserved it." Bracca looked at him. "You were worried about me." "I was." "You didn't know me." Tomas became serious. "That's why I was worried." Bracca lowered her eyes. Tomas stepped closer. Braca, I spent most of my life believing strength meant standing alone. She looked at him. I was wrong. He took her hand. Strength is knowing who you can trust enough to stand beside. Braca felt tears forming in her eyes. Tomas, he reached into his coat. Then he dropped to one knee. Braca froze. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Tomas held out a simple silver ring. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't decorated with diamonds. But it was beautiful. I don't have a grand house, he said. I don't have great wealth. I can't promise you a life without hardship. Braca stared at him. But I can promise you this. He took her hand. I will never ask you to become smaller so I can feel stronger. A tear rolled down Braca's cheek. Tomas continued. I will never be ashamed of who you are. He looked directly into her eyes. And I will never let you wonder whether you are wanted. Braca covered her mouth. For 28 years, she had believed there was something wrong with her. She had believed she was too strange. Too strong. Too different. Too old. Now, standing before the man she loved, she finally understood. She had never been difficult to love. She had simply been surrounded by people who didn't know how. Yes, she whispered. Tomas smiled. Yes. Braca laughed through her tears. Yes, Tomas. He placed the ring on her finger. Shadow suddenly let out a loud whinny. Braca looked toward him. Even Shadow approves. Tomas laughed. Of course he does. Their wedding took place beneath the open sky several weeks later. There was no grand church. No expensive decorations. Just the people who truly mattered. Tomas stood beside Braca beneath an old cottonwood tree. Shadow stood nearby, wearing a simple leather bridle. When Braca walked toward Tomas, the entire gathering became silent. She was no longer the woman everyone had called an old maid. She was Braca. A woman who had survived rejection. A woman who had earned her place. A woman who had tamed the wildest stallion in the territory without ever trying to break his spirit. Tomas took her hands. I choose you, he whispered. Braca smiled. And I choose you. They were married beneath the setting sun. Years later, travelers passing through Red Creek would hear the story of the Apache warrior and the orc woman who tamed his wild stallion. But Braca always corrected them. I didn't tame him, she would say. I simply gave him a reason to trust. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of her life. Shadow had been considered dangerous because no one understood his fear. Braca had been considered unwanted because no one understood her heart. But Tomas understood both. He saw the strength beneath her loneliness. The kindness beneath her toughness. The woman behind the label. And in the end, Braca discovered something she had spent her whole life waiting to learn: she had never needed someone to rescue her. She had only needed someone brave enough to truly see her. And when that person finally came, he didn't ask her to change. He simply looked into her eyes and said the words she had secretly longed to hear. You were never too much. You were never too late. You were always the one I was waiting for. And beneath the endless western sky, Braca finally knew what it meant to belong.